Okay, we are on, Robert. I hear some noises, but I hope it's just temporary.
Okay, it might be my fan. I could turn it off. And the other thing is, and just from what I can tell, my thing, do I look too bright? It might be too bright.
No. You look fine. You look fine.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's a fine evening in Moscow, and it's a daytime in East Coast, where you're now at. So we are talking again to Robert W.Sullivan the Fourth, the antiquarian, the Freemason, and the author of 5 published books about the cinema symbolism and esoteric Freemasonry. So our last interview generated a lot of response and lots of questions to you. I've written down the list of questions, but the list is too long. So I will, in the end of the interview, pick up several questions which most of the readers and viewers subscribe to, because these questions hit the majority of likes in the comments of the YouTube. So I would ask all these questions to you. And now I would like to bring forward some very obvious examples of the symbolism in the movies. I would ask you about the classical movie, which everybody knows about, and so you could break it down. And of course, most recent movie, most big studio blockbusters, which might be interesting for the people, such as Matrix. I've received many questions about the Matrix. Personally, I didn't go entirely through the Matrix. I was bored already on a 40th minute. And frankly, I couldn't even finish. It doesn't necessarily mean that the movie is too bad, but it's not to my taste. In any case. So, Robert, which movie would you like to review first?
Right. Well, the one we could certainly, for a classical movie, I certainly don't mind talking about The Wizard of Oz. Which also ties into a movie, a more recent movie, Ghostbusters Afterlife, because there's a lot of imagery. Ghostbusters Afterlife plays on The Wizard of Oz.
Excellent. So let's start with Wizard of Oz. I suppose everybody from every grown-up generation knows about this movie. It's, if I'm not mistaken, 1935, 34, right?
I think it was 38, 39.
Well, I think a little earlier, but doesn't matter. It's classic.
Yes, it's from the 30s. That's for certain.
Yeah.
No, this was a movie that I'm routinely asked about, and that people like the breakdown of it. It was written. The novel comes from a man named L. Frank Baum, who was a madam of Madame Blavatsky's Theosophy Society. And it is filled with a lot of esoteric and political undercurrents. The reason why the movie is an interesting analysis is it's multi-layered. It has more than one level of meaning. And of course, the first level is just the perfunctory one. It's just about this farm girl who goes on an adventure and to this magical land and has this adventure and then goes home. End of story. But if you look at it much more in depth, Baum encoded 2 layers of deeper symbolism, deeper meaning that come through in the movie, the Victor Fleming movie. Of course, this movie is, everybody knows it. And the first level is probably the more well-known of the 2, and that's the political allegory. And that is that the Wizard of Oz is essentially a retelling of essentially 1895 to 1900 political, socio-economic life in the United States. So we have the idea of the yellow brick road representing the gold standard, and of course it leads to Emerald City, which represents, it's green, so it represents paper money. And of course the Wizard of Oz would then be President William McKinley, and of course this sinks because he wanted to use the gold standard to promote paper money. You had in the 1890s, the late 1890s, you had a depression, and of course the 3 travelers of Dorothy signify this. You had the scarecrow, which is the American farmer. Then more importantly, you had the Tin Man, who is the laborer. And when they stumble across him, he's immobile. He can't move. And this signifies the Depression, where laborers were laid off in droves. And of course, what restored economic prosperity was the oil companies, such as Standard Oil, J.P. Morgan, Rockefeller, people like that. And of course, the Tin Man becomes mobile again, becomes economically independent, becomes mobile again with oil when they oil him up. That's what that's signifying. And the Cowardly Lion character represents the opponents of William McKinley, who were all bark but no bite. Williams, Jennings Bryant, Eugene Debs, the socialist, people like that. The little dog Toto reflects Williams Jennings Bryant. He was a non-drinker. He didn't drink alcohol. That's what's known as teetotaling, or being a teetotaler. And this is where the dog's name Toto comes from. So you see this political allegory going on inside the Wizard of Oz. And again, one of the things that comes from this is the loss of the farm when the farm is taken away by the tornado. Again, this reflects this economic depression that was going on in the 1890s, where farmers were losing their land, and that's signified by the tornado. So you have this very deep, political allegory going on. Oh, another thing with it is the two little Munchkin guilds that Dorothy meets when she gets to the when she gets to Munchkin Land. You have the Lollipop Guild, which represents the budgeting laborized union movement, and then you have the Lullaby League, which is the females, and this is the suffragette, the awakening women's right to vote movement that was going on at the time. Both of them were predominant in the late 1890s, early 1900s. So you have the whole political allegory going on in the Wizard of Oz. Then you have the deeper, occult, esoteric, Gnostic interpretation of the movie, which, again, should come as no surprise because L. Frank Baum was involved with Blavatsky's Theosophy movement. And this is where you have the idea, I think we may have mentioned this last time, where, the girl goes on the adventure to this magical land to essentially receive gnosis. And it's this whole Gnostic retelling of where the yellow brick road represents the golden path of religion, but it ultimately leads to the false messiah. This is what's known as the demiurge, or the demiurgic creator, who is not what he seems. And again, you look at the wizard, he's this, ferocious looking green man, green face, but, he's just this little guy behind the curtain. He's nothing. This reflects the Gnostic idea of the demiurgic creator being a fraud. She journeys with the three travelers who desire a heart, brain, and courage. And this comes straight from Blavatsky's teaching, saying that those who are trying to receive gnosis must be intelligent, have fortitude, and have courage. This is why they're seeking what they're looking for. The whole idea of the Wizard of Oz is this girl going on this journey to find herself, to know herself, which is, again, comes out of the world of Hermeticism, which she eventually does. She does at the end have her Gnostic epiphany, where she comes to realize for her that there's no place like home, and hallelujah, she winds up going home. So the whole Wizard of Oz is a Gnostic allegory of trying to know thyself. You can clearly see in it some of the elements of the Joseph Campbell monomyth, and this idea of sort of, for her, the quest represents purification, where she, the challenges that she has to overcome is sort of preparation for her to having this epiphany. You see it where she has to go through the dark forest. We see elements of that, of course, coming out of the world of Dante Alighieri. The encountering with the trees, the wicked witch. We think of things like the Hermetic spheres, the Kabbalistic spheres of spiritual purification. If you wanted to equate it to Hebrew Kabbalah, the wicked witch would represent the Gevurah spear, which is the evil female archetype. So we see this also prevalent in The Wizard of Oz. So, when you watch the movie next time or you read the story, really, understand that you're looking at something that's just overloaded with these deeper political, socioeconomic, and occult undercurrents. And because of that, I think it's really one of the reasons why it's such a classic, even in the year 2022.
Robert, are you aware about the synchronicities with a Kennedy assassination and this movie? There are some fan facts which might be just a simple synchronicity, or might be just very far-going plan. For example, it's been very widely known that President Kennedy, John F. Kennedy, was a big fan of Judy Garland. She was his personal friend as well. And many times he said that he watched the movie Wizard of Oz when he was a kid. Then Judy Garland was picked by Kennedy personally as his promoter for his electoral campaign. And strangely, that Jack Ruby, as you know, Jack Ruby, the guy who was tied to the simultaneously to the police force in Dallas and to the mob, the guy who killed supposed killer of the assassin of the John F. Kennedy, Lee Harvey Oswald. He was wearing the Resistol hat while killing the Lee Harvey Oswald, and the Resistol hat is made in Garland, Texas, and his nickname, because Ruby he's not real full name. He was actually born as a Jack Rubenstein, but okay, it's logically he shortened his name to the Ruby, so he was called Ruby. He wore the Resistol hat, which was made in Garland, Texas, and as you know, the Ruby shoes were very central in the Dorothy story in The Wizard of Oz. So it's kind of a very strange synchronicity, and it's not the only one. There are plenty of such things in between Kennedy and Wizard of Oz, and everything what was related to the Kennedy assassination, including also the name of Lee Harvey Oswald. But it's kind of very difficult to explain, but because they're simple but many fold things surrounding Lee Harvey Oswald. Synchronicities out of his life and Dorothy and John F. Kennedy as his victim, supposed victim, right? So I don't know if you're aware of this or you ever broke down such things.
No, I'm not aware of that. I'm not aware of any nexus between John F. Kennedy and the Wizard of Oz. The one that is uncanny is the nexus between the Kennedy assassination and the assassination of Abraham Lincoln.
Yeah.
Those are amazing. Those are really startling. But I've never analyzed any sort of nexus between the Kennedy assassination and the Wizard of Oz.
Well, since you mentioned the nexus between the both assassinations, Kennedy and Lincoln, we probably should talk about this, but
sure.
A little bit later. But
okay.
Going back to the Wizard of Oz, for example, there was a rumor that one of the Munchkins, which was on a movie set, hung himself, and actually in one of the original copies of the movie, which were actually rolled in the cinemas up to the probably 80s, you could still see behind the trio, behind this four traveling towards the castle on the yellow brick road, you could see the Munchkin actually hanging on a branch, and the Disney tried to explain it away, saying it was not a Munchkin but a very big long-legged bird. But I looked closely to the copies which were still having this in the movie, and it was definitely this little guy who hung himself. But at the same time, the rumor surfaced that this guy hung himself. There was one of the Munchkins in LA pronounced as missing. So it probably was a real Munchkin, the guy who was playing Munchkin. He really hung himself on the set, and I don't know what was the reason why Disney Studio didn't cut out this episode for a number of years. They only removed it basically after almost 40-something years. So it was amazing to me.
Well, let me speak on that. For starters, Walt Disney did not put out The Wizard of Oz. It was put out by MGM Studios. The story with the Munchkin hanging himself has been pretty much been debunked. I've heard the rumors also, but I think it was something else. But I can tell you, with the Wizard of Oz, there was a lot. I mean, the Munchkin hanging himself, whether it happened or it didn't happen, there was a lot of tragedy that did beset that movie. I know,
Exactly.
I mean, Jack Haley, who played the Tin Man, got sick because he was inhaling fumes from the makeup he was wearing, and he had to go to the hospital. The snow that you see when in the poppy field is asbestos fibers. That's a very toxic fiber that can cause cancer. Judy Garland blamed the movie for her premature death. Essentially, she was put on a diet, a regimen of dietary. The filmmakers didn't want her gaining weight. They wanted to keep her looking pure and thin and innocent, and they put her basically on like amphetamines, which she got hooked on, and basically plagued her the rest of her life. And she wound up dying prematurely, I believe around the age of 46, 47 or so. So whether the Munchkin story is true or not, I've heard it both ways. I mean, I've heard what you're saying. Some people swear it's a Munchkin hanging himself. It apparently occurs in the scene where it's right after the scene where the trees are throwing the apples at them, and they go off into the forest right before they meet the Cowardly Lion. Some people swear it's a Munchkin hanging themselves. Some people have analyzed it and saying it's something else. I've never really gone much further than that with it. But I know that the making of it was beset with all sorts of problems. I mean, Margaret Hamilton had her face melted off. The scene where she emerges, comes up from the floor with the fire, where they're trying to show you she's coming up from the bowels of hell. The way it was supposed to work was when she descends, the smoke comes out, and then she drops down, and then the flames come up. Well, they did it wrong. They fired it while she was still descending, and it looks great when you watch it on film, but it actually gave her second-degree burns on the side of her face, which I think she had to stop filming for 2 months, and then come back and reshoot the scenes, her final scenes. So the movie was beset with all sorts of bad fortune and bad luck. The Munchkin story, hanging himself, is, you're 50-50 on that. Same with the idea of Pink Floyd's music, Dark Side of the Moon. I've been asked this a million times on this. Does it sync to The Wizard of Oz? I've never tried it myself, but I've talked to people who tell me, some people have told me it works 100%. Some people tell me it's bumpkin. So, take that for what it's worth.
I would disagree though on a Munchkin story, because the clips I analyzed, they were definitely not of the bird. It was the man hanging. I was just surprised why they didn't cut it out. Why they only cut it out after a number of years. It was visible for many years, and only then they actually concocted the story about a long-legged bird, something like a heron or I don't know what's flamingo or something like this, but it didn't look anything like a bird. And somebody handed over a copy from 1978, I believe on VHS or H8. I don't remember which one, and it clearly showed the person. So I don't know what was the meaning. Was it intentional that they actually didn't cut it out and demonstrated for a number of years? But
it could be a case of where they weren't aware of it. I mean, a lot of times, there's mistakes in movies that they're not aware of. So that could have been possibly that they weren't aware of it, and maybe someone brought it to their attention finally, and they saw it and cut it out.
There was another interesting story, which was actually confirmed by MGM. You're right. You correct me. It wasn't Disney. It was MGM. The MGM confirmed the story that actual coat of Frank Baum turned it up on the set. Somebody bought it in a secondhand shop and brought it on a set, and it was actually somebody of the crew was wearing it, and then MGM confirmed it was the original Frank Baum coat, which he sold to probably to the pawn shop or maybe a secondhand shop, and it turned it up on the set. So it was amazing. Like almost 30 years or 25 years after his death, his actual coat was on the movie set. So It was quite a strange story. but it was
Yeah,
confirmed.
that's crazy. That's interesting.
Yeah, and then another rumor, which is actually to me looks like more like a true story, that the song "Somewhere Over the Rainbow" been used many times over as an MK Ultra theme, because many of the assassins were triggered by the song, and even same. I mean, it served almost the same gadget as an assassination of Ronald Reagan. The guy who tried to assassinate Ronald Reagan was always telling that he was triggered to do something by the catcher in the rye. So
Right,
each time he was walking by the shop, he was compelled to purchase the book. And actually, when he shot Ronald Reagan, he was wearing somewhere in the pocket this book. And the same were going. Same was told about this song, "Somewhere Over the Rainbow." So it probably was designed as a trigger song, same way as the book "Catcher in the Rye" was. So I don't know if you're aware of that.
I know of the Catcher in the Rye because I don't know of Over the Rainbow, but Catcher in the Rye was definitely a book that was being read by the guy who shot Ronald Reagan and the guy who shot John Lennon a few months earlier.
Exactly.
So yeah, I mean, there's definitely seems to be something to that. Yeah, but I never heard the one with Over the Rainbow, but what you're saying wouldn't surprise me. But there is definitely something with Catcher in the Rye because you had these two assassins, both reading it and shooting with months apart. There was another one, the story that I had always heard with there was a movie based on this. It was the Manchurian Candidate.
Exactly.
Where the trigger,
the original one was Frank Sinatra, and the one remake was the Denzel Washington, if I'm not mistaken.
That's it. That's it. The trigger device in that was the Queen of Diamonds playing card. The story that I had always heard, and this is just something I had heard, was with with Robert Kennedy's assassination by Sirhan Sirhan. He was a Manchurian Candidate, and the trigger device for him was the woman in the polka dot dress. Because if you watch video, there's this mysterious woman lurking around in a polka dot dress, and I think he had said something to the effect of this when he saw that. That's what sort of hypnotized him to go kill or shoot Robert F. Kennedy. So yeah, there's all sorts of mind control devices that, and certainly the Catcher in the Rye. I don't dispute that at all.
Actually, Sirhan Sirhan keeps maintaining, as he did actually from almost 50 years. Over 50 years ago, that he didn't have anything to do with assassination. He didn't remember anything after he approached Robert Kennedy. And actually, Robert Kennedy Jr. Keeps talking about the name of the real assassin, which recently, I believe 2 years ago, died on the Philippines. It was the ex... I don't know. He was actually a member of CIA, or he was some kind of a contract killer. So the guy recently passed away in the 80s. I mean, he was already somewhere in the 80s. I forgot his name, Romano, something like this. He died September the 11th on the Philippines, I believe 2 or 3 years ago. So Robert F. Kennedy stated many times, and especially on the day on which he learned that this assassin died in the Philippines, he publicly said on his Twitter and Instagram account that he knows that this guy had everything to do with the assassination of his father and not Sirhan Sirhan. Very interesting nexus.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, and one little detail: the children of the Sandy Hook School, all the time on the commemoration of the shooting, sung the song again and again. So I don't know why they picked this song. So probably it has some kind of occult meaning, which I still cannot figure. I just sense that it has some kind of occult meaning. I cannot figure out which one.
It's certainly possible. It's a popular song to say the least. But I don't know anything about it in relation to Sandy Hook or anything like that.
Okay, and since you mentioned the nexus between the assassinations of the Abraham Lincoln and John F. Kennedy, so as far as I know, in let's say in a public discourse, there are like 10 or 20 points which relate one assassination to another, like a very weird synchronicities. But I saw the list, and the list goes on almost up to 285 strange so-called coincidences between those assassinations. So what can you elaborate about those?
Well, that's right. You say you're the same way I am. When I was a kid, there was like 20 or 30 of them, and I know there's more of them that have been discovered. But off the top of my head, I don't have a list or anything in front of me. But I remember, I mean, some of them were, it was like, when Kennedy died and when Lincoln died, they were both followed by Southern Democrats named Johnson, Andrew Johnson, Lyndon Johnson. Both had the same amount of letters in their name. Lee Harvey Oswald, John Wilkes Booth, both had the same amount of letters in their name. It was one of them was, Oswald allegedly shot, Kennedy from a warehouse and hid in a movie theater. Booth shot Lincoln in a movie theater and hid in a warehouse or a barn. What were some of the other ones? Kennedy was shot in a Lincoln Continental. God, there's so many of them that but both of them were shot by. Oh God, I just can't remember. There's so many of them. I wish I had a list in front of me, but both were shot in the presence of their wives. The assassin of both of them were dispatched and killed very soon after their deaths. There's lots more of them. I used to have a lot more of them, but I can't remember off the top of my head. You probably will throw some at me.
I will if I will remember. I just forgot.
That's the way I am.
More than half of them. But there's one more fun fact out of the let's say modern times. Do you know that the wife of the ex-prime minister of UK, Tony Blair, is a direct descendant of John Wilkes Booth, and she actually admitted it. Cherry Booth, it's her maiden name. She's a direct descendant, and they actually the whole family of the actors, the Booth actors, from which comes the John Wilkes Booth, which assassinated the Lincoln. They are of the English descent, and they are from the aristocratic family, and many members of this family immigrated back to England in the mid of 19th century, already after the assassination. So it's a very prominent British family which made an amazing actor's career, a theatrical career in America. And there are so many weird synchronicities about them, and even Julius Caesar, which will blow your mind. I will just try to remember some of them, but you have a time to bring something up from the other story. Let's say what other movie we wanted to review.
Oh, we could certainly talk about the one that we were, we could certainly talk about the Wizard of Oz, or the Ghostbusters Afterlife, because that ties into the Wizard of Oz.
That's a so-called Ghostbusters Part 2, right? It's
part like 3.
Part 3 already. Okay, let's do it.
Yeah, well, so at any rate, the one movie that I just got to watch was Ghostbusters Afterlife. It was out back here in November, and I watched it recently on Blu-ray. The movie is overloaded with Easter eggs, going back to the first movie and the second movie. But that aside, the one thing that they really did encode very, very well in that film was this sort of retelling of the Wizard of Oz. And the tip-off for this is the little girl in it, McKenna Grace, who plays Phoebe Spangler. This is Egon Spangler's granddaughter. This would have been the Harold Ramis character. She wears red shoes throughout the entire movie. And you can definitely, when you see that, you can definitely see the parallels between the two films, where in Ghostbusters Afterlife, they're leaving the city, going to the farmland. She's leaving the one environment that she's familiar with and going to the foreign environment. She's having an adventure. She has three companions, her brother and these two other friends who she meets along the way, or she's with the brother, but she meets two other people. Basically, she's helped by three people on her adventure. And of course, at the end, she confronts this very malignant, off-worldly, godlike figure where in The Wizard of Oz, Dorothy Gale does the same thing. And it's the whole notion of where Dorothy goes to Oz and winds up saving everybody. It's the idea of the outsider as the hero. And it's tipped off by her red shoes. It's interesting, too, because, and I mentioned this in Cinema Symbolism 3, there was another movie that did the same trick a few years ago. It came out, I want to say, in 18 or 19. It was a movie called Satanic Panic. And it was the same thing, where the woman in it, the young woman in it, has this sort of adventure through this strange neighborhood, and she has the red high tops on, and it was the same thing where they were using the shoes to convey this sort of strange adventure she was having to run parallel with the Wizard of Oz. So you had this when you watch Ghostbusters Afterlife, you will definitely get this Wizard of Oz vibe coming off of it, which I thought was very well done. It was very subtle. But it was definitely there. You could pick up on that vibe if once you caught onto the red shoes. In that if it triggered in your mind, this is the Wizard of Oz. You could definitely see the parallels.
Okay, that's fair enough. By the way, and now I remember the name of the so-called real assassin of the Robert F. Kennedy. His name was Eugene Caesar. Okay, and he died September the 11th on 2019. So, and it all ties in the assassination of Abraham Lincoln and John F. Kennedy. Not only Robert F. Kennedy, but also John F. Kennedy, because the father of the John Wilkes Booth is the Junius Booth, and his full name is Junius Brutus Booth. Will you imagine this? So the same guy who actually assassinated the Julius Caesar, the same Brutus. Would you imagine this? So the father of the assassin of the Abraham Lincoln is called Junius Brutus Booth, and the Junius Brutus Booth is the assassin of the Julius Caesar almost 2,000 years ago, and the guy who assassinated the Robert F. Kennedy is Eugene Caesar. So I don't know what it is. I don't know if is it a weird synchronicity, or is it just some supreme being playing, or supreme intelligence playing with us?
Yeah, it's definitely a great example of synchronicity. Like I said, in my books, I document the nexus between Elvis Presley and the sun, which is amazing, which is astounding. And it just comes out of the world of you can't make it up. I don't believe there's a human hand behind it. But again, it's just, this string of unbelievable coincidences that makes you think of, yeah, this is synchronicity at work.
Okay,
I don't dispute that.
Yeah, I will name some of the synchronicities between John F. Kennedy and Abraham Lincoln. So they were both elected in the 60s, right? 1860 and exactly 100 years later in 1960, right? Their fathers, Thomas Lincoln and Joseph Kennedy, right? Their mothers, Nancy Hanks. By the way, Tom Hanks is related to Lincoln by this Nancy Hanks. He's a direct descendant of the Nancy Hanks. And the mother of the John F. Kennedy is a Rose Kennedy. Then their wives, I'm looking at the portraits. They even look similar. Mary Todd and Jackie Kennedy, right? Then the son, Robert Lincoln and Robert F. Kennedy. And their Baptist teachers, William Graham and William Billy Graham. So, 100 years apart.
Right.
Billy Graham, everybody knows Billy Graham. So then the brother of the John Wilkes Booth saved the son of Abraham Lincoln while he was falling from the from the pavement to the almost under the train, and he pulled his coat and he pulled him out. And while it was happening, actually the son of Lincoln arrived to the station with the owner of the Ford Theater, where his father would be killed later. So I mean, this is to me something unimaginable. I mean, what kind of conspiracy could it be, or is it a real weird synchronicity, or is it just I don't know. I'm really lost on this. I mean, there's some kind of intelligent design which shuffles the destinies of the people, and if you appear to be very attentive to such a so-called fan facts, you would see that this kind of occurrences, they cannot be designed even by the special long planned assassination plan. So how can you interweave the destinies of people such way that they will appear even 150 years ago unimaginable?
Oh yeah, it's incredible. Yeah, I mean it's definitely some sort of. I mean, it's definitely. I put it to you like this: it's definitely coming out of the world of the supernatural. How or why I can't tell you, but it's definitely some sort of supernatural thing going on when you see these coincidences lining up, and you just realize there's more to it than just a coincidence. There's definitely some sort of meaning to this. And like I said, the Kennedy and Lincoln assassinations are one. The stuff with Elvis Presley and the Sun is another one. Carl Jung called it synchronicity. I call it Jungian synchronicity in my books. And it's just, I don't think there's a human hand behind it. I just don't think that's possible, to be honest with you. But there's clearly something going on. But what that is, it's supernatural, but that's about all I can tell you.
The list goes on. For example, their favorite poets, the Robert Burns by Lincoln and Robert Frost by John F. Kennedy. They even look similar. Their superintendent secretary, John A. Kennedy and Evelyn Lincoln,
right,
100 years apart.
Yeah.
Their political opponents, Adlai E. Stevenson the first and the Adlai E. Stevenson the second, with the Kennedy, and they are coming even from the same family. I mean, they are related. We have political opponents. Then their predecessors, James Buchanan and Dwight Eisenhower, their vice president, Andrew Johnson, and then 100 years apart, Lyndon Johnson. Their vice president's successor, Ulysses S. Grant and Richard M. Nixon. Their vice presidents, Hannibal Hamlin and Hubert Humphrey. H. Their successors, vice president, Schuyler Colfax and Spiro Agnew. Their vice president's successor, Rutherford Hayes and Gerald Rudolph Ford. Their assistants, Charles S. Taft and Charles P. Taft, same family. I mean, they are descendants of one. I mean, they're descended from the same family. Their chief justices of the Supreme Court, Salmon Chase and Earl Warren. Their civil rights activists, Frederick Douglass and Martin Luther King. The military chiefs, George McClellan and George Bundy. I mean,
come on, yeah.
What do you make of that?
Yeah, it's crazy.
The military intelligence agents, Edwin Stanton and Alan Dulles, their secretaries of state, William Seward and Dean Rusk, and the list goes on. There are 276 synchronicities, and those are the facts. There are some people which are picking up the synchronicities indiscriminately. They've been easily debunked, but I only collected the synchronicities which are being confirmed.
Yeah, so sure. There's more than that. There's more to them than that, but I just can't remember them. I used to have a chart around here that had a lot of them lined up, and another thing that was really uncanny was the people that you rattled off, like John Wilkes Booth and people like that, like Andrew Johnson, Lyndon Johnson, they all had the same amount of letters in their name. That was another thing that was going on. They all had the exact same amount of letters in their name. So strange, definitely weird.
Yeah. So it's a very long list, and it's all the points on this list all amazing.
I agree.
By the way, there's a very strange song which Bob Dylan put out, I believe, in 2020 about the assassination of the John F. Kennedy. I don't know if you're aware of that. It's a very long song. I believe it's almost, I think, 6 to 9 minutes long.
Yeah, I don't know it. I don't know the song.
Yeah, check it out. It's Murder Must Fall. So it's called. So he received the Nobel Prize, and then I believe 1 year later or 2 years later he put out this song. It believed it'd been written somewhere in the 70s, but he only put it out on the record in 2020.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with the song. I'll have to go listen to it.
Okay. So who else? What can you tell us about the Matrix, especially the last part? Well, you can also talk about the first part, of course.
Yeah, sure. No, this was a. I analyzed the first three Matrix movies, 1, 2, and 3, in the first movie book. Of course, I always find myself coming back to them because they're one of the greatest examples of Gnostic cinema, especially the first one. I just got done watching the part 4, The Matrix Resurrections, last night. I watched it for the first time. I thought it was okay. I didn't think it was anything great. Some of it didn't. I'm gonna have to watch it again because some of it I couldn't quite make sense of, especially regarding the Morpheus character. I don't know what they were doing with him, or if this was supposed to be the same guy, or something kind of like a different iteration of him. There's a lot of Easter eggs in the movie again that go back to the first trilogy, and it kind of plays on this idea of, I mean, it basically just is, it's like a reinvention of the very first movie where kind of you're watching it and you're not sure what's going on, and you're just you're kind of led astray by this idea that the first movies were this video game this guy invented. Is it real? What's not real? And then of course, you find out that again he's back in the Matrix and everything, was back the way it was. That he's basically in a false reality again. So it's kind of like the first movie all over again. I liked it. I didn't think it was great, but I didn't think it was bad either. Like I said, I've only watched it the one time, so I'm going to definitely take a look at it. I probably will put it in Cinema Symbolism 4. But again, it has all the, Gnostic, overtones of it, the Valentinian themes of the false reality. You have the demiurge creator, who is called the analyst in this one. This is the psychiatrist who has the blue glasses. And again, you'll see the use of the blue and the red, especially when they're in the false reality. The color blue is very pervasive. Again, that off the top of my head on the one viewing, that's kind of what I drew from it. I'll definitely watch it again. I liked it. I didn't love it, but I thought it was good enough. I don't know if they're going to do any more of them. I don't think they will, because I don't really, if they're going to do any more, then it's probably just going to be a remake of part 2 and part 3. Me personally speaking, I would have taken it maybe in a little bit of a different direction. But like I said, I watched it. I think you told me you couldn't really get past it. It is kind of confusing.
True.
Yeah. Some of it really didn't add up. I'm still kind of scratching my head over what they did with Morpheus. I kind of wish they had kept Lawrence Fishburne. I wish they had kept Hugo Weaving for Agent Smith.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think that would have made it a little bit more pleasing, more understandable. But overall, it was a good effort. I didn't dislike it, but again, I'll take another look at it. And those were my initial reactions to it.
Okay. Do you know that there is the black lady, I forgot her name, which actually claims that she wrote the Terminator and she wrote the Matrix, and actually the studios stole her idea, but she keeps maintaining the story that she's the actual creator, And the book she wrote somewhere in the end of 70s. I briefly sifted through the pages of this book, and I see a vague similarity with the Matrix and Terminator story, but I think it's too far-fetched to say that the studio stole the idea, because actually their ideas more clearly been used and sampled in the big movies, such as Dan Brown's book, The Real Da Vinci Code. He actually took the story of the Holy Grail, Holy Blood entirely, and built around it a pretty mediocre fictional story. And these guys, the Lincoln, Badgett, and Lee, they lost the court case against Dan Brown, actually, because the court said, actually there's the grains of the idea which have been described in the this three authors book in 1974 in Holy Grail and Holy Blood, but it's entirely fictional story with Dan Brown, so he cannot be liable for the plagiarism, which I think he does, but he got away with that. He made money. Of course, Lee, Badgett, and Lincoln also made some money back in almost 50 years ago, but not the way Dan Brown did, because it actually skyrocketed his career, his writer's career, and almost all his novels were actually put on a screen and made big bucks. With Tom Hanks, of course, all this Illuminati movies, and the book was very mediocre, and all of the books after Real Da Vinci Code were very mediocre, but they made a lot of money in Hollywood in any case. But I think Dan Brown was very popular with the Freemasonic lodges, because I've heard that they actually officially thanked Dan Brown with a resurrection of interest among the people in Freemasonry, which he woke with his books in the people. But I don't know what is your take on that?
Yeah, the Da Vinci Code, it definitely comes from the Holy Blood, Holy Grail book. But yeah, I mean, that's right. I mean, he basically just took their idea and just crafted another story around it. That's pretty much allowed. You can't, I mean, the catchphrase with this is you can't copyright an idea, only the expression of it. And so, for example, I mean, you can write books about people being possessed by the devil and being, possessed, but as you can't just make it look like The Exorcist. But you can't stop people from writing about demonic possession because The Exorcist has already done it. You can write about demonic possession and make movies about it, but it just, as long as it doesn't look like, The Exorcist, you're fine, up to a certain point, of course. What that point is a question for the judge. But I'm familiar with the Holy Blood, Holy Grail book, and I'm familiar with the Dan Brown movie. I haven't read the novel, but I kind of didn't think there was enough there to pursue a lawsuit or anything like that. But I kind of, for me personally, I always thought that the National Treasure movie, at least the first one, was sort of the movie that the Dan Brown stuff wanted to be. I always thought National Treasure was much more entertaining, much more interesting, much more, when it came to Freemasonry than the Da Vinci Code ever was. That's just my personal opinion on it. I know Brown wrote a book about Freemasonry, a fictional book called The Lost Symbol, which I have not read. I believe it was supposed to be made into a movie, but I think it was turned into maybe a TV show that aired on like Netflix. I don't know. I've never seen it. But I really am not the biggest Dan Brown fan. I did analyze in the Royal Arch of Enoch, which was my first book. I did analyze the Da Vinci Code movie and the sequel to it, which was called Angels and Demons. I did analyze them because there is in those movies a lot of Masonic, especially in the first Da Vinci Code, a lot of Masonic Royal Arch symbolism in that film. There is a lot of undercurrents in that film. Same with the National Treasure movie. Really more so in National Treasure than in Da Vinci Code, but still there's a lot of undercurrents in that film. So I did analyze it. I mean, it's an okay film. I wasn't in love with it, but I have watched it, and I thought enough of it to analyze it. So I haven't heard much from Dan Brown in recent years. I don't know if he's still writing or anything, but no, I did analyze Da Vinci Code and Angels and Demons. Probably more Da Vinci Code, and that was done in my very first book, The Royal Arch of Enoch.
Well, what do you think about the substance of the story, which was promulgated by Dan Brown and a real Da Vinci Code? But because actually, Bagent, Lee, and Lincoln never actually stated that the story about the Priorate of Zion was true. They kind of hypothesized about this, but Dan Brown said that the line of succession between Knights Templar and the Priorate of Zion was unbroken until the recent times, and he always maintained that all he told about the Priorate of Zion and in a real Da Vinci Code was true. So he basically stated that it was a historical works rather than the works of fiction, and basically he in this book, because I read the book as well before I watched the movie in 2003. So he stated that Leonardo da Vinci himself and the other big masters of the Renaissance, Raphael and Michelangelo, they all were the members of the so-called secret society Priorate of Zion, and they conveyed the knowledge unbroken from the Knights Templar to the recent times. So what do you think? Would it hold the water, or is it entirely fictional?
It's entirely fictional. I can tell you where it comes from. At the turn of the century, there's a Rosicrucian enthusiast artist in Paris, France, named Josephine Paladin, who put on a series of Rose Croix art exhibits in Paris, and one of the posters that advertises, and this is around the turn of the last century, this is in the early 1900s, one of the posters that advertises this Rose Croix salon features the Holy Grail on it, with Leonardo da Vinci dressed up as Joseph of Arimathea, and features Dante Alighieri dressed up as Hugh de Payens, the founder of the Knights Templar, or one of them. And it's from this poster that this guy named Pierre Plantard created this entire fiction out of, where there were these grand masters of the Priory of Zion, and he traces it all the way up until modern time, and he gets down to where he actually lists, believe it or not, of all people, as one of these grand masters is Claude Debussy, of all things, who was this musician who, is right around the fin de la
composer.
Yeah, I mean, he must have flipped a coin on this. He must have either decided to go with Claude Debussy or Eric Satie as to which one he wanted to be the Grand Master, because these guys both produced what you would call hermetic compositions. So both of them, he could have gone with either one, but he went with Debussy, not Satie. But from what I can tell, it's this poster for this Rose Croix saloon that the Paladin, I talk about it in my last movie book, that generated this whole Priory to Zion, thing of, with the Holy Grail, Holy Blood, being traced down through this secret society. And I actually in Cinema Symbolism 3, I actually put the poster in there, and you could see it for yourself, where it's Da Vinci as Joseph of Arimathea and Alighieri as a Knight Templar, as the Payans, and it's this poster that really spawned this whole idea of this secret bloodline, and being kept secret by this Martinist type secret society. It really comes down to this poster for one of Paladin's Rose Croix saloons.
What did you say was the name of the artist? Palladino or Paladin?
Paladin. He was an artist who lived in Paris, France, and he promoted. He was an artist, and he promoted this series of. He was involved in the occult, and he promoted the series of Rosicrucian. That's what he called them, Rose Croix saloons, for artists to promote their artwork. And it was right around this time he was involved. It's an interesting story if you read about it. Most people know about the English guys like Aleister Crowley and MacGregor Mathers and the Golden Dawn and things like that. It was right around the same time as the Golden Dawn was coming on the scene. That in Paris you had this other secret society coming on called the Kabbalistic Order of the Rose Cross, and Paladin was instrumental in its founding. And essentially, this is the France's version of the Golden Dawn. And you had very similar things going on with this as you did with the Golden Dawn. You had competing magicians trying to kill each other. And Paladin was heavily involved with this. And like I said, during the end of the 19th century into the early 20th century, Paladin generated or produced in Paris this string of Rosicrucian, he called them Rose Croix saloons, where esoteric artists could come in and display their artwork or put on music compositions, things of that nature. And one of the saloons, I think it was the sixth or seventh one, its poster, you're going to want to take a look at it. It's in Cinema Symbolism 3, features this occult artwork, which really generates this whole notion of this secret Christ bloodline through the Holy Blood, Holy Grail, being kept secret through people like Dante Alighieri, Leonardo da Vinci. And it really is born out of this guy's poster, for lack of a better word.
The reason I ask you and emphasize on the name from you, Robert, because the Paladin is a quite telling name. You remember this anti-Masonic hoax by Leo Taxil about the Paladin. So that was stated that the secret society was called the Paladins, and there's another name connected to the occult. Is the Italian peasant woman. She wasn't peasant, but she was from very low, let's say, from very low classes. Her name was, I think, Eusebia Palladino, and she was a really rare medium who actually displayed a very supernatural abilities, and even very famous criminologist and philosopher Cesare Lombroso, which you of course know about. He studied her, and it was actually alleged that she was faking many of her medium successes, but while she was studied by a real scientist, they actually couldn't debunk almost 90% of her spiritism tricks.
Right.
I shall put it probably. And her name was Palladino. So I'm quite amazed that this strange names keep permeating through the 19th and 20th century, and they all been tied up to occult.
Well, let me. The name of the guy in France is Paladin. I may be pronouncing it wrong. It's completely different than the rites that Taxil talked about. He called those the Palladian rites.
It's the same, Robert. It's the same.
Yeah, no, it's different. They're spelled completely different.
Yeah. Spelling doesn't matter, Robert. Spelling doesn't matter. The etymology is the same. The spelling is different, but etymology is the same.
Well, but I would not put any nexus between those two. They have absolutely nothing to do with each other, other than they sound a little bit alike. But because the Palladian rites were named after Pallas Athena, but that's another story. But Paladin, the guy in France, wasn't a Freemason or anything like that. He was just an esoteric artist who was promoting these, what he called these Rosicrucian saloons. It was nothing negative. It was nothing conspiratorial. It was basically it was to give artists who were interested in mysticism a place to exhibit their wares, for lack of a better word. And you can read, there are several books that I could recommend that you can read about this guy. Like I said, yeah, in Royal Arch, I mentioned the poster. If it comes very early on in the book, where I actually mentioned the poster, that basically says this is the thing that birthed Holy Blood, Holy Grail, and the Da Vinci. Lack of a better word, but no, it is interesting. To say the least. I did find it interesting that this whole conspiracy or this whole story of the secret, bloodline and all this and that and the other basically came out of a poster for this guy's salon.
We know for the fact that Pierre Plantard was the mystificator, and he had actually a very shady past. He was one of the I believe he was a collaborator in France Vichy regime, but he definitely knew something. I know that he smuggled this fake manuscripts into the Paris Library, National Library, but he definitely knew something. So I mean, if there's someone acts as an imposter, it doesn't necessarily mean that everything which is tied to this person is fake. Same as this Eusebia Palladino. She was faking many things because she was using and fooling people for the financial gains, but she did possess supernatural abilities, extrasensory abilities, and even Cesare Lombroso, which was a real scientist, he couldn't explain the whole thing surrounded the spiritual seances with her participations. They couldn't explain it. Not only him. She was studied in Britain. She was studied in Italy, in France, and during the 20 years, they couldn't debunk 90% of her so-called tricks. But they knew for the fact that she did fake something. Yeah. So same with Pierre Plantard. Yes, he was an imposter. He claimed that he was also coming from the long bloodline of this Sinclair family. Maybe he did not, but obviously he picked up some kind of knowledge about such things from somewhere, and he kept maintaining it. So,
no, I agree. I agree with you. I mean, the one thing you can look at is just to echo that is in London the Enfield poltergeist, which was the subject of the movie The Conjuring 2. When you look at that, I mean, you look at it objectively. I mean, it was clearly early going on that there was legitimate poltergeist activity inside that house. I mean, and it was a haunting that no one could explain. I mean, everyone would have had to been in on it, including the police, who actually witnessed things moving around in the house. So, how do you explain it? But you're right. As it went on, there were hoaxes involved with it because the people who were living there wanted the investigators out. So they started hoaxing some things, hoping that the people were gone, would leave. But, like you said, just because they did that doesn't take away from the earlier stuff. It does taint it. But clearly, if you look at that case objectively, there was legitimate poltergeist activity going on in that house early on. But later on, they just started faking stuff because they wanted the people out. But unfortunately, it taints it. But I'm with you. It doesn't mean that the early stuff wasn't legitimate. It was just that they were faking stuff to get the people out of the house because they wanted to get on with their lives at that point.
By the way, you probably remember that the child star of this movie, Poltergeist, she died very early, soon after the filming of this Poltergeist movie. And I mean, many people were doubting that it was a natural death. But anyway, it was a premature death. She was still a kid.
Oh, yeah. There was loads of people. That movie's another strange one because there's a lot of people who died in that movie. The little girl was one, Heather O'Rourke. She died
exactly.
Right after.
I mean her.
And then if you watch the movie, there was an older sister in the movie. And if you watch Poltergeist, they say they send her to like her friend's house, and she's never seen again in the movie. She died. She was murdered by a boyfriend, like in her driveway, like within a year after the Poltergeist. Like I think even maybe during filming of Poltergeist. And then when you go to part 2, the Indian guy in that, I forget his name, he died right after it. And then the guy who was the preacher, he died right after it. So there was a lot of death surrounding the Poltergeist franchise. Strange, but there it is.
Okay, great. Would you like to take a break, because we've been on air already over an hour?
Yeah, let's take about a 5-10 minute break, and we'll finish up with about half an hour or so.
Okay, great.
Okay, let's see here. Oh, okay, no, that's fine. All right, I'll be back.
Okay.